So we're going to talk about patch plots today. Here is the patch plot assignment. So this is what you're going to make. And let me see if I can show this to you here. There we go. So what's going on here? Well, remember, paperwork. In the professional world, paperwork is how you make sure that other people can figure out what you've already figured out, right? That paperwork is one of the ways you communicate to someone else how to do this thing that you have figured out how to do. You do paperwork so you can hand it off to a crew person and say, set this up. And they should be able to look at your paperwork and figure out how to set something up without having to go through all the things that you had to go through to figure out how to do that, okay? At school, however, paperwork, yes, does that, but it does another thing where it provides you the opportunity to show me evidence that you have thought about all the things you have to think about in order to be successful, okay? And a patch plot is one of those things. I'm not sure how many people really use a patch plot to like hand off to a crew person to like put something together, because it is a lot of information to try to like absorb, but the process of building this forces you to think about some details that you're not likely to think about. Let me explain. You've all had some degree of experience messing around with sound equipment at this point in your life. And you've had experiences where, it's not worked, okay? Now, aside from the parts where you just don't know how the equipment works, and you didn't set it up, you didn't program it right or whatever, but assuming you did everything right and it doesn't work, most of the time it's because of a bad cable, right? Assuming you didn't do something stupid, then, which is probably the most common reason why it doesn't work, is you did something dumb. But the second most common reason why it doesn't work is a cable is bad. So the cables and the connectors that are on the cables are the most volatile piece of your sound system. Like, they are the thing that is the most fragile and the easiest thing to break. Generally speaking, the equipment doesn't break anymore. It used to break a lot more than it does now. But now that everything is just a computer chip, it's the equipment is quite a bit more durable and robust than it used to be when we first started trying to do sound electronically. That's not to say that equipment doesn't break or can't break. It absolutely can, but that is a less often occurrence now. So, but the cables, however, have always been fragile, and they are still fragile. They break easily. It's these little thin copper wires that are soldered into these little tiny lugs, and you got strain relief things, and you run a piece of scenery over it. You can cut these things, and then they're dead. There's just so many ways that these things can go wrong. And the most common way that a cable goes wrong is in that connector. The connector, the solder joint goes loose, or it's backwards, or a piece falls off of it, or those connectors, that connection point between the cable and the connector is like the most volatile piece of this whole thing. Okay? So that is the thing, that connector on the end of the cable, that is the thing that is most likely to break and go wrong in your system. And it is coincidentally the thing you have the most of in your system. So the thing that you have the most of is the thing that is the easiest to break. How many connectors do you suppose you have in a system? I mean, Reese, over at Ragtime, how many connectors do you suppose we have on that system? Ballpark.
Like 1,000?
A lot. I don't think it's quite 1,000, but But think about even just like that wireless microphone whole thing, right? There's a connector on the adapter for the mic element, 2 connectors, and then there's yep, and then there's a connector that goes into on the end of that, and then there's the connector on the pack, and then there's the antenna connector on the pack, and the connector on the antenna itself. So that whole thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 connectors just on that thing we put on the adapter, and we've got 24 of those. So 24 times 6, 144 connectors just using the 24 wireless transmitters. Okay. Yeah, very close. You know, now you got the receivers. Each receiver will listen to 2 of those microphones, and each receiver has, you know, antenna, XLR network on the receiver. So there's 5 connectors on the receiver, and each of those connectors mate with another connector, so that's 10. So 20 connectors per receiver, and we've got 12 of those, right? You know, you start building this out. It's a lot of connectors, and it's the thing that is the most likely to break. And so the patch plot is where you identify all of those connectors. You call them out and you name them. Where are they? What are they? What do they connect to? And, you know, all of that. Because if you have 1,000 of them, and if they are the most likely thing to break, it sure would be nice if you knew where they all were. Because it only takes one of them to break to take down your whole sound system. Right? The right connector broken in the right place in the system can take the whole thing out. Okay? If the connector between your control surface and your stage box on your digital console, if one of those connectors goes out, you got nothing. Right? So it sure would be nice if you knew where they all were. So if something isn't working, you know to check them all. So that's one thing, is do you know where they all are? And do you know all the connectors that are involved in a particular signal path? So that when a particular path of signal doesn't work, you can go through those connectors one at a time and figure out which one's messed up. Okay? So that's one point of this drawing. The other point of this drawing is before you put the system together, it sure would be nice to know which sort of connectors you need and which sort of cables and adapters you need to put this thing together, because missing one little adapter can, again, mess up your whole show. That happened to you guys, yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Monday night. It was like, okay, we got one connector wrong. And that meant no keyboards and no guitars.
Oh, no, we got bass and drum.
Yeah.
We got no keyboard or guitar.
Yeah.
Because we had TRS cables instead of TS cables.
Yeah. So one connector was wrong. Well, 2 connectors really. Yeah. And that meant you didn't have 2 instruments in the band. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you got to figure them out. So what you're going to do with this is you are going to make a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet shows every single connector in the system. Yep. So here we go. We start with an AKG D112 microphone. It has, now this is an older patch plot when we were still using like gendered terminology to identify our connectors. We kind of moved on from that now. So when you do it, if you would like to do XLR pins and XLR sockets, that's fine. Probably should. But this is a patch plot that I did probably 20 years ago. Not quite 20 years, maybe 12 years ago. But it's a small enough patch plot that it's not a ridiculous amount for you guys to put together, so that's why I pulled it out. So we've got an XLR pin connector on the microphone. Okay, that's like built into the mic. Okay, and therefore we would plug a cable into that, and that cable would have an XLR socket connector on it that would mate with that microphone, right? And then there would be a cable in between that connector and the other side of that, which would be an XLR pins connector, and that would connect to an XLR socket connector on the end of a snake. And a snake is a cable that is a bunch of cables bundled together into one thing.
And then is the socket hole?
Yes.
And
Yes. And so that connector, by the way, on the snake has a label, and it's number 1. And then it all goes together into this little bundle of a thing, right? And then the other end of it, we'd find a wire with that label on it, and it would have another connector on it. And that connector would connect to something on a mixing console. And that mixing console would have a label on that connector. And here's the mixing console called the Yamaha LS9. Okay? Coming out of the LS9, you have a label that says Omni Out 1, and that label is next to an XLR connector. And you would have a cable that has an XLR connector on it that would connect to that. Okay? And that cable would have a label that says left. And this is what's called the console snake. It's built into the theater in this case. Okay, that you see what we're doing here?
Yes.
We are literally going connector to connector through the entire system. We are not going to miss a single one. Okay? Now, there are some conventions here that we're using. Now, I want you to understand that I made this up. It was me and Jared Bowman. And Jared Bowman was a student in our program years ago, and he was the only person in his class. He was an undergraduate student, and I think he started out with 2 or 3 people in his class, and 2 of them dropped out or whatever. So it was just him. And so he was awfully lonely in his class. And so it was me and Jared, who would do a lot of classes together. And one day, Jared and I sat down to do patch plots as a class. I'm like, Jared, I want us to figure this out. Let's figure this out together. And so, because this is a drawing I wanted us to start creating, because I could see we had a lot of situations where students were like missing things. They were missing the fact that they needed a 1/4 inch to XLR adapter to make this thing work, and they weren't finding that out until they got into the space. I was like, we need to do a drawing where you have to figure that out on paper before you go over to the shop, so that you know all the cables you have to get. So anyway, Jared and I made this convention up, okay? And the convention we made up is that pieces of equipment will be gray. And we decided to use color to just help break up all of this data, right? Because if it was all just empty cells with text in it, it would be much harder to read it and follow it. So we decided, let's use color to break this up visually a little bit to help us understand the different kinds of things we're looking at, okay? So if it's a piece of equipment, like a microphone or a mixing console or an amplifier or a loudspeaker or a processor or a receiver or a stage box, or a piece of equipment, you're going to make that gray. And you're probably going to make the text of it bold as well, just to help it jump out, okay? If it's a snake, and a snake is a cable that has inside of it several cables. Okay, so it's several cables in one. We decided we'd make that yellow. Now, if it is a wall plate, and by wall plate I mean like you go out into the theater and you see there's a little plate on the wall that has 2 XLRs that you plug into the wall, and that runs through the wall somewhere, and you find the other end of that at a patch bay somewhere, okay? So if it's a wall plate, we decided that would be purple. Some version of purple, okay? Or lavender, or whatever you want to call it. And then we decided there's another thing that you would encounter, which are called patch bays. So in a theater, you have wall plates, and you plug things into the wall, and then that wire goes through conduit, and the other end of it, usually all of those wires that show up on the wall around the theater tend to show up in the same place on the other end. Like they're in the same rack as rows and rows of connectors, okay? And what you do is called a patch bay. And what you would do is you would use patch cables to patch them together. So you would have a cable that is on the wall that says mic 3 on stage, okay? You plug a microphone into that, and the other end of that shows up at a patch panel. And then you also have a cable that plugs into your mixing console that may say mic whatever number you want. And the other end of that also goes back to the patch bay. So you have 2 connectors on the patch bay. One has its other end over at the wall on the stage, and the other has the other end at the console. And so you would make a little cable that you would patch. one-to-one, to connect those together to get that mic to run through both walls into the console. So that's a patch bay. And if it's a patch bay, we decided that would be blue. Okay? Now, those decisions were completely arbitrary. And you're thinking, Jason, that's completely arbitrary. I don't like those colors. I would prefer it be different colors. And that's fair. But here's the problem. The colors only mean something if we all agree that they mean something. And if we all decide that colors mean different things to each of us, then the ability to use color to communicate something disappears, right? So if each of you decide that a patch bay is a different color for you, then when we look at each other's patch plots, we'll never know which is the patch bays and which are the wall plates and which are the equipment, right? Yes, Eric.
So like, are you just trying to do different poses and effects that are like the most important ones, so like the white ones are like the ones that are connecting with the dark ones.
Well, we're not necessarily communicating importance here. We're just trying to communicate difference, right? That there's different cells on this drawing represent different kinds of things. A piece of equipment is different from a cable, and a piece of equipment is different from a wall plate, right? And we just want to break it up visually a little bit so we can see where's all the equipment. Oh, well, it's all the gray things. Okay, where are all the patch bays? Oh, it's all the blue things.
Okay, so
Right.
this area, the gray area is someplace, the white area is
Yeah.
another place.
Yeah, it's a different kind of thing. That's all we're doing. And so this is my way of saying is don't play around with the color too much. Okay, the colors are completely arbitrary and completely made up, but that doesn't mean that you can pick your own colors. Because if you start picking your own colors, then I look at your patch plot and I have no idea what I'm looking at. Like at that point, the use of color becomes not helpful anymore. Right? It's only helpful if we all use the same things. Okay. There's another convention we came up with, which is you see all these things where the cable is red and bold. And we said, okay, there are some cables in your system that you either have to bring with you or could walk away. Like you could pick up this cable and walk out of the building with it if you wanted to. Okay? And then there's cables that, for example, here's a cable, some wiring. This Phoenix connector goes into house wire. That's a cable that is running inside of a wall or inside of a rack, and it's soldered to something. You know, the likelihood of someone, well, to pick that up and walk out of the building with it, you'd have to have tools, wire cutters or soldering irons or something to like pick that up and get. So it's not likely to leave the building. Okay, but this little 10-foot XLR cable, yeah, that could totally leave the building, right? Someone in the theater next door could be like, oh, I need another patch cable. And they could come over to your space and just grab that and walk out and take it over there, okay?
So that's like you're allowed to like leave the theater with this.
It's not that you're allowed to.
Not you're allowed to. We can't
It's that it's possible for that to happen.
Right. Okay.
And so if it's possible for that to happen, then it's something that you, as the engineer who is putting the system together, you are responsible for making sure that cable is in the room, okay? So if you have to make sure it's there, because it's possible for it to not be there, then we decided we would make those things red. Because it's like, okay, that's something you have to make sure is there. You know, all of these XLR cables for these mics, if I don't bring those with me, they aren't probably going to be there. Okay, these little adapters, this 1/4-inch tip sleeve to XLR, if that cable's not there, you know, if I don't bring it, it's not going to be there. Okay, so if it is a cable that it is possible to hold the entirety of that cable in your hand and walk away with it, then it should be red.
Okay.
Okay.
That visual makes sense.
Yeah. And that's basically it. So, any questions about that so far? Yes. Equipment is gray. Snakes are yellow. Wall plates are purple, or light purple like lavender. You don't do dark purple or you won't see the text. And patch bays are blue, right? And then cables that can be walked away with are red. And it's just the text is red, not the cell, okay? So for example, the reason we did it that way is, for example, here's a snake that is yellow, and that's how we know it's a snake, but the label of it is also red, which tells me it is both a snake and I could walk out of the building with it, right? So that 6-channel XLR snake, I have to make sure that's there. I am responsible for making sure that that cable is in the building, because it's possible that it might not be. Somebody could walk out of the building with that. Okay?
Equipment is gray, snakes are yellow, wall plates are purple, patch bays are blue, red is equipment that you can physically walk out.
Red is cables that you can
Cables.
physically walk out
Okay. What was the
of. Wall plates,
wall plates and blue is
patch bays.
And this, the whole thing doesn't have to be like all caps, like all the time.
No, it doesn't have to be. I mean, you see, I'm not doing that way.
is there any like
No, and so that's important. Is this is not a spreadsheet version of your system diagram, so it doesn't have to lay out the same way. It's not a picture of anything, so it doesn't have to obey the laws of physics. It doesn't have to be any particular dimension. It's just data. It's a spreadsheet showing data. Okay, so the length of that cable is not super important for this context. That's not to say you couldn't put that information there if it became important. If it was important to you to know how long each of those XLR cables were, you could just say 25-foot cable instead of just cable. But for purposes of the data this is trying to communicate, it's just connectors. We're trying to find all the connectors is what we're trying to do. Okay? All right, so let me show you how to do this. You all have access to Microsoft Office for free through the school. And with that comes Excel. I know you all are like Google Sheets people, because that's what your schools, your high schools and middle schools and elementary schools taught you. I would advise against it, because Google Sheets makes things a little difficult when the ability to set up a page layout is a little more difficult in Google Sheets than it is in Excel. It's not that it's not possible, it's just a little challenging. All right, I'm going to start to recreate this, okay? So I'm going to take you through how I would do this. So I'm going to start by doing these ULX receivers, okay? So I'm going to type ULX1, and I know I have 6 of them. So watch what I'm going to do. This is very important. Are you watching? So I'm going to take my mouse, and I'm going to hover over the bottom right corner of this, and then I'm going to click and drag. And look what happens. It automatically increments them. Okay? This is a spreadsheet. It's for like money and stuff like that. So it's really good at dealing with numbers. Okay? And this would be, these things have a label called mic out. And I'm going to click and drag those down. And those have XLR connectors on it. So this will be XLR pin connector. And I'm going to drag that down. Now, those are all equipment, right? So I'm going to make them gray. So I'm just going to click and drag to select all those cells. And then you see this paint bucket tool up here? I'm going to do that as a fill color, and I'm going to say fill it with that gray. And then, because this ULX1, that's like the name of the thing, I'm going to make that text bold. Okay? And then I will select all this again, and I'm going to turn on the grid lines for everything, or all borders. So I'll just say, give me all the borders, and there we go.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense? That makes sense to everybody so far? Okay. And then I'm going to do the snake. Okay, and the snake is got XLR socket connectors. I'll drag that down. They will have labels that start with 1. So I will, sometimes when you drag, you see how it's not incrementing this time when I drag this number? You can force it to increment by holding down the Option key while you drag. So I'm holding down Option right now, and then it increments the number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you see it not incrementing, that's what you do. Hold down Option while you drag it. And then, just because I think it looks nicer, I'm going to center that text, that particular text in the cell. I also like, just for, and I didn't necessarily do this in the example, but I found that I kind of like to justify this so that connectors touch connectors very, very tightly like that. Right? So I'll justify this text to be right justified and this text to be left justified so that those connectors clearly touch, right?
Jason,
Yes?
it did not work. The numbers.
So you're going to click on the box,
Got it.
start dragging, and when you see that it's not incrementing, hold down Option, and it will switch. You don't click Option first. You click first, and then while you're dragging, hold down Option, and it'll force it to increment. Okay, well, let's see. Yeah, I would download the actual app.
Okay. I have it on my computer, so I must put it.
Yeah. So we're gonna. Oh yeah. It's gonna work much better if you actually download the app and not the web version of it. The web version does not have all the same features.
Okay, that's probably why this is it.
Okay. What's that? No, you're just gonna make your life a little more difficult.
I feel like it's like just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nah, I want to do that one.
So, okay. Then we go to XLR pin connectors. Drag that down. And then I'm doing XLR socket connectors on the mixing console. Now, oh wait, hang on. So I made a mistake. Look, here's an important step. So look, I made a mistake. I went straight to the connector after I did this label, but I forgot. I got to do the snake and the other side of that. So I'm going to go here and say Insert Columns. 1, 2. And then I'm going to type snake. And now watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all of these because this needs to be all one cell now. And I'm going to select merge. Which is, I don't know where it is in the menu. But there's a little button here, which is merge and center. If you do that, it'll merge those cells together.
Got it.
And then you also have, in addition to horizontal text alignment, you have vertical text alignment in Excel. So I'm going to click this button that says middle text alignment for the vertical. And then I'm going to just copy these same numbers. So I'm just going to copy and paste these numbers over here. And then we're good. And I'm going to make this whole thing yellow. And if I do this yellow, it's a little too atomic for me. So I'm just going to go in and tone that down a little bit. One second, I'm going to find myself a little bit better yellow. So you have two rows of alignment features here. So you've got vertical alignment and horizontal alignment. Okay. Kat, you having trouble? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a big down. If you go to like office.com and log in to like Outlook or get your email. Yeah, no, it is there. Yeah, go to Outlook on office.com or whatever, like you're gonna get your email. And then there's an option there to download it. So go to your account here. It's just downloading. It'll take a second. So you don't need to do this with me right now. I'm just trying to show you a couple of tips here. Okay. So you see kind of what I'm doing, right? Now eventually I'm going to realize that if I look, I'm going to realize that, oh well, I've got another snake I have to draw here, and that has a cable that goes into it. So I'm going to need a couple extra cells at the beginning. So that's when you go back to this first column here, and you just insert some more columns to get you that room. Okay? And you start building it out. Now this snake, the text is going to be red and bold, so let me do that. So you just build this out that way, and when you're done, it's going to look something like this. Let's see. Okay. So here's the whole thing done. And I just kept it going all the way across, like all the way from beginning to end. I've got it. It's all in there. Okay? This is every connector in this little teeny black box musical I did. No, this is the cooking show thing. So I got this far just in that last 5 minutes, right? I did that pretty quick. This part, I did do this pretty quick, but no, I'm not going to do it. But this is where you would end up when you're done, okay? Is something like this, okay? So the whole thing's done now. It's all laid out. I think it's right. I've checked it. All the connectors are there. Everything's awesome. I'm totally, completely ready to go here. So now what I got to do is I got to lay this out, okay? Because I'm not going to just shrink that onto one piece of paper because it would look like this. All right? So I'm not going to do that. So let me show you now what you're going to do. You're going to keep this this layout, and where it says sheet down here, you're going to right click on this and say move or copy. and you're gonna check this box that says create a copy. And here it is. Here's my new copy, and I'm just gonna call this, I'll call this my layout demo. This way, if you screw this up, you can always go back to your original and try again, because you're about to blow this whole thing up. This thing that is perfect and excellent, you're about to mess it all up, okay? Because you got to figure out, how do I get this all onto a piece of paper? So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the File menu here, and you're going to go to Page Setup, and you're going to decide, probably Landscape, and that's fine there. And if you go to Print, you're going to decide which paper size you want. Like I'm going to do, I did 11 by 17. And once you do that, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but you see these dotted lines that show up? That's a page. Yeah. So based on just the scale I have right now, I can start to see where I'm going to hit the end of the page. Okay? And so what I want to do, the first thing I want to do is I just want to kind of go through here and make sure I'm not cutting anything off. Because sometimes you can cut things off. If you double click on, like, okay, here's one that's getting cut off. So if I double click on the right side of this F column, it will automatically resize that column to fit the text that's in it. And I'll double click this one too. Yep. So I'm just going to kind of do that here to make sure everything fits before I totally commit to where the end of the page is. Okay, so there's where my page is starting to end. So let me show you what I did here in the CAD layout. So what you're going to do is you're going to break this thing up into rows. And what you're going to do is you're going to find a spot where you can break it and start a new row. But you always want to repeat the cell that you ended off with on that new row. So I stopped here on this cell that says console snake and stage box snake, and I repeated it over here so I know where I left off, right? So if I go back in here, I can see that if I break it here, that's where the theoretical edge of the page is. But if I break it there, what I'm repeating is this generic XLR connector. And if you can help it, you want to break a line and repeat on something that is more easily, uniquely identifiable than just some generic XLR connector. So that's why I ended up saying I'm going to break it there, because I repeat that, and that's going to be much more clearer, you know, what I left off with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select everything after that. Okay. And I'm going to select copy. And then I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to give myself a few rows here. But I'm going to just select the first cell there, and I'm going to say paste. And it puts it in there. And then I'm going to escape out of this, and now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to select everything after that cell again. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to right click on here and say clear contents. And no fill. And no borders. And then I'll just go in here and put the border back in on that edge. Okay? And now I'm back. So now I'm going to need to resize some things, just because some of these are bigger now. So I'll resize everything again. Yeah. So see how this one is kind of like wrapping weird, even though I double click on it. So you can click and drag to make it a little bit larger. So I'm just going to do that because I didn't like quite how tight that was. I'll do it there as well. Okay. Same thing here. Same thing there. All right, so now I'm getting close here. Where do I want to break it? Well, the most likely place here looks like maybe here on that 2 system. Let's see what I did over here. Yep, that's where I did it. So I'm going to break it there. And I will this out. I will copy. And then I will paste down here. Okay? And I will just keep breaking this up until I get it to fit in this width of the paper. Okay? And you will end up with something that's, let's see, there. So now I've broken up. And then the other thing I did is I kind of selected this row here. And then on the border, I did a really thick top border. Just to give myself that dividing line to make it very clear that we're starting a new line here. So once I have that more or less fitting, then what I'll do is I'll select all of this and I will say File, Print Area, and I'll say Set Print Area. And this tells Excel this is the part of the spreadsheet that I want to print. Okay, that's good to go. And now I can print it to a PDF file. So I'll save it as a PDF. And then if you want to have your title block on this thing, like that, you can go into AutoCAD, you can create a layout that uses your title block, and instead of putting a viewport in here, you can go to Insert PDF Underlay. Let me go and get this. And I will put it in here and scale it to the size that I want it to be. Okay, and I would just fit that into my title block once I had my title block in there. Okay, and now it's a layout in AutoCAD. So there's the final AutoCAD layout. Okay, and then you can plot that with your CAD title block like everything else. Okay, that makes sense? All right. So let's now go back and look at the assignment. So the assignment says, recreate the patch plot shown below using a spreadsheet program such as Excel, Numbers, or Google Sheets. So you can use Google Sheets if you want to. If you like, some people like that Numbers spreadsheet program that Apple has. Like, you can do that if you want. I prefer using the Excel offline app because it has the layout features are a bit more advanced than some of the other tools. But if you are much more comfortable in some other spreadsheet program and you're willing to wrestle a little bit with the layout stuff, that's fine. I don't really care what you use to make it, but I need the result to be the same. One thing you're going to run into, like if you use Google Sheets, for example, is that PDF export, and then going into AutoCAD is usually pretty dicey. It ends up looking really weird. It like rasterizes it, and it pixels. You can see the little dots. So you be very careful about how you do it. The best way to do it would be to export it from Google Sheets to an Excel file, then open it in Excel, and go to PDF from Excel. And then you'll get a PDF that's actual vector-based data. Okay? Just a heads up on that. So you're going to format this to fit on an 11 by 17 inch sheet of paper and put it in AutoCAD Layout with your title block. And what I want to see is the editable source file for your patch plot. So I want the Excel file or the numbers file, or you got give me edit access to the Google Sheets file. You know, whatever it is, because I need to go in and be able to look at how you made the thing. Okay? And I want a PDF file of the AutoCAD layout, like this with your title block. Yep. So I want the source file, and I want to see the PDF plotted layout with the whole thing. Now, like I said, if you want to change the connectors, you know, we've started using XLR pin and XLR socket on these in the last couple of years, because I think generally the sound industry is starting to realize that why are we assigning genders to our connectors? That doesn't make any sense, and that's silly, and it leads to other problems and issues that we don't need in our life. So so we're starting to, the manufacturers have not quite caught up with us on that yet, but professionally we're starting to do that. So if you want to do that, that's fine. I'm not going to dock you if you do it exactly like this. But if you want to start getting in that muscle memory and brain memory of like using that pin and socket terminology, then you can totally do that for this project. That's fine. Yeah. So that's what we've sort of, that seems to be where the convention is heading. Is we're swapping out this term pin for male and socket for female. So yes, if you would like to practice that and get that going, that's totally fine, and that's probably good. I don't know. I'm using Veranda. Verdana, yes. Okay, questions from anyone? All right. So this is not hard to do, but it is a level of detail that perhaps is going to be new to you. Okay? So at this stage, again, you're recreating a patch plot that I've already done. But in real life, like, this is you thinking through this system. How does this thing connect to another thing? How does that work? What kind of cable do I need? What kind of connectors do I need? You have to go look at the equipment and see what sort of connector does it have on it? And what sort of adapter would I need to make that work? And then you would put that in the spreadsheet. All right? Yes, Eric. You want to make what? Is it not working for you? Let me see. Okay. Any other questions? All right, so take a minute and get started on this. And if you're downloading the software, get it downloaded, open it, and make sure you can make it work before you leave. And that way I can help you if you get stuck, okay? But once you feel like you understand how to do this and you've got the software behaving for you and everything, then if you're ready to leave, you can leave.